What's going on, everybody? I'm back. We got Bellator 296 this week. I'm just going to run through the card fairly quickly, go over the spots I like betting wise. I've taped most of the fights. I think there's two that I haven't had a chance to look at yet. But yeah, like I said, I'm going to be doing Bellator cards every time there is one for the foreseeable future. I feel like it's a value add that, just isn't provided very often. Guys, if you like the show, please drop a like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. The channel would appreciate it. Lags would appreciate it. And as usual, if you're new here, you can catch our normal weekly UFC show every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern. So with that, I'm going to jump right in. Bellator, first fight of the night. We got Jose Augusto. He's taking on Simone Biong. And I have a bet right off the bat here. I bet Jose Augusto at plus 110. Line currently sitting at Augusto minus 119, Biong minus 101. I don't actually think it's a bad line, even where it is now for Augusto. I guess the line is where it is just because, we have seen Augusto controlled on the mat in the past, and Biong, generally likes to take the fight to that area. But looking at the fight, I don't see a lot from Simone Biong that I'm very impressed with. He's very, very low output. He's not very, very far into his MMA career. He was originally a professional basketball player, started, I think, 6 or 7 years ago. But you can see he's just very, very green. His striking, he lacks defense. As I mentioned, he's low output. Doesn't really throw much technically, tends to fire hooks out there. I mean, most of his game when he's working it well is kind of just pushing guys up against the fence, grabbing a body lock and just ripping them down to the ground. But even in that discipline, I don't think his control is anything special. I don't think his wrestling is anything special. And when you see him on top of guys, he's constantly leaving space and or putting his hands like on the mat, which are just huge no-nos in mixed martial arts and in jiu-jitsu. And so on the one hand, I get it. He's kind of a hot-ish prospect, and Jose Augusto is coming off 2 straight losses. But I look at this fight, and skill for skill, I feel like Augusto is the better fighter everywhere here. He's certainly the better striker. He's the more accurate striker. He does a better job of picking his shots. He's technically better, throws a lot of leg kicks out there. In the grappling, he's probably the worst wrestler, almost certainly the worst wrestler. I don't really think Augusto's wrestling is great, but he's got decent first-level takedown defense. He can get stuck on his back, but even if he gets taken down here, Augusto's actually got what I'd call very good jiu-jitsu for 205. Like, not in general, but given how scarce decent jiu-jitsu is at 205, I would say his is exceptional for that level, especially for Bellator. And he is pretty good at sweeping off his back, attacking subs from there. And it's the kind of fight where I think if Biong takes this there's a reasonably strong chance he's going to get subbed and or swept in that position. And I don't think he'll have an easy time taking it there anyway. And then the last layer of it is just like the cardio layer. I don't really think if Biong can't lay on top of his opponents and just kind of control them from guard, he doesn't really have great cardio. We've seen that when he's pushed, he has a tendency to slow down bad. And so, yeah, I mean, I kind of think the market's overcorrecting for Augusto getting knocked out by Rumble and losing to Alex Polizzi. But Polizzi is a much, much better wrestler here than Biong is. So, yeah, I mean, I think there's much more finishing equity on the Augusto side. I think he's got better cardio here, and I just think he's the better fighter. It's possible he could get laid on for 3 rounds. I just don't rate Biong's grappling enough to think that happens at a high clip. I made Augusto like minus 150 here. So that's the shot I'm taking here. If I think minus 125 or better is decent. So good luck if you're taking it. And no problem, man. I'll be doing it week after week. Moving on, second fight of the night. We got Barama Kamara, Romain Debian. It's kind of an interesting fight because I really, really don't like Kamara's game. And in tape, I don't want to say I was impressed with Debian's game. Like that's the wrong word. But given the level of this fight, and given where the line is, I was kind of surprised that I actually think Debian's got a somewhat coherent striking game. He's got a good jab, a good 1-2, a good low kick, very good cardio, and tends to keep a high output. And so while I was taping it, I was like, I'm almost definitely going to play him here because historically I have not liked Barama Kamara's game at all. It's very, very raw. He doesn't really have great tools anywhere. He's very tall and very long, and I guess hits hard, but I think his striking is a complete mess. He's a poor defensive grappler. But, when going back and taping Kamara, the one thing I will say is similar to the fight prior to this, talking about Byung, Kamara seems to be, even though he doesn't have a grappling base and isn't a good grappler, he likes to just use his strength and size to kind of bully guys into the clinch and drag them down and just hold them there. And while I think in terms of MMA skills, Debian is the better fighter, I have seen this guy taken down a handful of times, and he has just shown no competency to get off his back, like whatsoever. Like, he doesn't even really make much of an effort to get off his back. Like, he's not trying to throw up a submission. He's not trying to work up. He just kind of accepts it and hopes he gets stood up. And, he's young, so he could make improvements here. And it's the kind of fight where I feel like either side could hindsight look like a decent sized favorite. Like, I feel like if Debian has made improvements and can get off his back, should be the favorite here, despite being a dog. But on the other side of things, if he continues to look the way all of his footage has looked, Kamara should have a pretty clear path via just laying praying here. Moving on, I think we have what is up until now the biggest favorite on the card. We have Vasyl Ajuj. He is taken on George Sasu. Not a lot to say here. I mean, Ajuj is minus 425, Sasu plus 325. Sasu's not very good. He hasn't fought much. Ajuj is a decent prospect. Yeah, I still have my questions about Ajuj's cardio and grappling if he fights a good grappler. But in the context of this fight, I think his takedown defense and grappling is more than enough to keep the standing and or get up if he gets taken down. And on the feet, he's just a much sharper striker. He's a good athlete. He hits hard. He's faster. He's fought better guys. I think the line's probably right. Maybe it could even be wider, but I mean, I'm not laying a minus 400 number on this kind of a fight. Fight after that, we got Fabricard Devkata. He's taking on Kerr Harvey. This just got announced. I have not had a chance to look at it. My guess, just from doing a quick once-over wiki cap on the Tapology page of Harvey, is that Giada should beat him and probably finish him. I'm kind of hoping we get a decent number either on an under or a Diada ITD because Diada not historically a huge finisher, so I think it's possible. But Harvey, yeah, he's beaten really nobody. It seems like he's a scrub from what I'm looking at. But at the same time, I don't know that for sure. And I have to tape it before I actually come to that conclusion. Just kind of thoughts off the top of my head. Next fight up, Tim Wilde, Chris Gonzalez. I actually bet Tim Wilde here, plus 250. Current price on this fight, Gonzalez minus 275, Wilde plus 235. I still like Wilde a lot at that number. On one hand, I get it. Gonzalez was, and I guess is still, like a pretty decent prospect. I know Bellator had very high hopes from him, and you can see why. He comes from a fairly high-level wrestling background. He's a very good athlete. He's very fast, and he hits hard. So his inherent skills are quite good and translatable for MMA. The problem is when you actually watch him fight, I haven't seen many improvements, and I feel like he's just devoid of process. While he's an excellent wrestler, he's bad at holding guys down, and which can work if you're proactive about attempting takedowns, but he's really not. He kind of just likes to strike. And on the feet, look, he hits hard and he's very fast, but his output is pretty poor. I think his defense is almost non-existent. And like you saw in his last fight, he knocked out Max Roskopf, but prior to that knockout, Roskopf was actually having a fair degree of standing success. And while, yeah, I know Roskopf had that one fight in the UFC, he's not a good striker at all. And the fact that he was kind of hanging in there and having success via volume against Gonzalez was hugely concerning to me. And even the wins Gonzalez has, it's like he won a split against Tokov. Like, that's aged well, but like Tokov has the same problem, very low volume. Aaron McKenzie's and Saad Awad, like Awad's pretty much washed. McKenzie is very, very mid. Like, he's a very good high regional guy, not really a guy you'd expect to have much success in like a Bellator or the UFC. So, and on the other side, you have Tim Wilde, and you look at Wilde and you can understand why people wouldn't love him. He's very gangly looking. He's not the best athlete ever, contrasting with Gonzalez's speed and explosion, but he's actually very, very high output. He's got very good cardio. He's very tall and very long. He's got a decent jab, a decent kicking game. He likes stay on the outside and just kind of pour the volume on. And in the grappling, look, he's not great, but he's got decent takedown defense. He's got a pretty good get up game, more than enough in the context of a fight like Gonzalez. My biggest concern for the wild side is I do think if you get inside his reach, he's there to be cracked and be hurt. He does keep his chin very high up in the air and he kind of relies on using his distance. And so if Gonzalez came out here, pressured aggressively, and insisted on getting in the pocket with him, I think he could have a lot of success and find a finish. And I think he could find a finish anyway, just that there's a big speed gap that favors Gonzalez in this fight. And so him closing the distance, putting Wild out wouldn't shock me. The thing is, Gonzalez, as I mentioned, he's just not a high output fighter. We haven't seen that in the past. There's no reason, at least at this juncture in their careers, for me to think that changes much here. And so with that in mind, I look at the fight. It's like I don't expect Gonzalez to hold him down. I expect if it goes 15, Wild to land significantly more strikes. Gonzalez could struggle somewhat with the length of Wild. Yeah, there's equity. There's a lot of equity on the side of Gonzalez landing big shots and winning via that way or knocking him out. But I really struggle to get past like minus 150 on the Gonzalez side. Like I'm okay with making him a favorite, given the youth advantage, the athleticism advantage, the speed and power advantages. But he's so devoid of process against the guy who is a very good minute winner. It's hard for me to see how this line makes sense on the Gonzalez side. Moving on, Sarvajan Kaminov, he's taking on Kevin Pecci. I did a very quick once over here. Not a lot of interest. Kaminov's an interesting prospect from Tajikistan. Well-rounded, decent grappler, decent striker. But Pecci, not a ton of tape on. He's 18-5. He's more experienced, which kind of stuck out to me. But he's beaten no one of consequence. So I don't really put almost any stock in that record. As I said, looked at this very briefly. I think the line's probably right. No interest in getting involved here. Moving on, much more fun fight here, though. We got Yves Landau. He's taking on, I still can't figure out how to say Niedzielski's name, but he is taking on Piotr Niedzielski. I think that's right. The line was, let's see, where do they have the line at this moment in time? Right now, Landau minus 115, Niedzielski minus 105. My gut on this fight is that Landau's probably the side. I do think he's the more explosive striker. He's faster. I think he has more diversity in his toolkit than Niedzielski does. At the same time, I do have just kind of some concerns with Landau's general approach. I think he's pretty easy to hit with straight shots. And he tends to stand directly in front of his opponents too, when he decides to sit down on his shots. His movement's not bad generally, but I just don't like the fact that a short guy like Landau doesn't kind of disguise his entries into the pocket better than he does. And, from a volume standpoint, I do think Niedzielski's volume is a bit more reliable than Landau's is. I'm a bit concerned that Landau's 36, Niedzielski's 32. I think the grappling's probably a wash here. And as I said, I do think Landau is, the better overall fighter. He's obviously more skilled and he's a better athlete. But at 36, and given the fact that he can be hittable at times against a guy like Niedzielski, who will attempt takedowns in volume 2, I don't think you'll hold him there. But Niedzielski does a lot of stuff that scores with judges. It's just not something I want to get involved in. If I got a good dog number, a plus 125, plus 130 on Landau, I'd probably take it. But I think even money to slight fave Landau is fine here. I don't really want to bet him with a favorite number. Moving on, I do have a bet here. We got Davey Gallen taking on Saul Rogers. I bet Gallen at plus 175. I think he's down to about plus 135 now. You can get him at plus 150 if you got Bet Rivers, plus 140 Betway, plus 142 FanDuel. I still think that's decent value. It's an interesting fight because on one hand, I think Saul Rogers, he's almost certainly the more skilled fighter, and Saul Rogers, in terms of his upside, it's always been quite high. He's got a damn good skill set. He's an okay wrestler. He's an excellent jiu-jitsu player. He's a big guy. He's a great athlete. The problem is I just feel like not only is Saul Rogers not getting better in his career, seems to actually be getting worse. His gas tank has always been a bit erratic, but it looked especially awful last fight. His fight IQ also kind of shoddy. But again, like his last fight, he was fighting Tim Wild, had him in multiple dominant positions that he gave up chasing a Peruvian necktie. Just it's too hard a submission to hit if you're fighting somebody who knows how to stop it. And Wild stuffed it easy the first time, and yet he kept trying to chase it. And sure enough, he gassed out 6 minutes into the fight. He has a tendency to do that most fights. He comes hard early, and if he doesn't get you out of there, or if he can't easily control you on the mat, he tends to fade pretty aggressively. On the feet, I don't think he has the worst tools in the world. He has okay hardware, but his volume is pretty low. He doesn't really mix up his strikes much. I don't like his shot selection. Just in general, like Rogers is the kind of guy that I'm trying to bet if he's fighting a guy he can dominate grappling. And to be fair to him, I mean, I do think there is some upside for him potentially dominating Gallon in the grappling. So you may be wondering, why am I betting Gallon? I do think Gallon's a decent jiu-jitsu player. Like, he's not bad at that, and he's got decent first level takedown defense. Even on the ground, so my concern here, and it's kind of the weird part of the fight, but Gallon does a really good job off his back of initiating scrambles and kind of either using that to get to a dominant position or just get up. But he doesn't really have traditional get-ups, and he's taking on a guy in Rogers who is obviously a very skilled grappler, as I mentioned. So it's possible Rogers could just kind of shut down those escapes and just kind of ride him out on top. But I don't really think that's the case. I think early on, I think the first round could be a bit difficult for Gallon, but I do think as the fight goes on, it's going to get pretty hard for Rogers to get him down and even harder to keep him there. On the feet, I think Gallon's got a pretty pronounced output edge here. You know, Gallon goes forward and throws a ton of volume versus Rogers, who doesn't throw much. There's a huge cardio dynamic here that favors Gallon massively. And so, like, looking at the fight, I feel Rogers evens a small fave makes sense just because he does kind of have a grappling upside. But at the same time, as I mentioned, Rogers' wrestling is only okay. And I kind of think if he goes hard early here, as he tends to every fight, he's not going to have a lot left to get those takedowns in the second half of the fight. And I feel like if he slows at all, Gallon's going to gas pedal him pretty hard and just put it on him. And even in the early, like, you know, I would have waited out to live bet it if I thought Gallon couldn't win rounds early here. But I do think, you know, there is some scope for Gallon maybe defending takedowns or giving Rogers some issues in the clinch. He does have a decent clinch game and voluming him early because Rogers doesn't really tend to throw much ground and pound. So it's the kind of situation where Rogers could conceivably take him down, hold him down for 2 minutes in the first round, and still lose the round just because Gallon outworks him hard on the feet. Ultimately, I think it's close to an even fight. I feel like for Rogers' price to be justified, he's got to be able to get him down fairly easily and hold him down. If he can't do that, I think Gallon should be able to pace him in this fight. And I think even if he can do that, it's going to struggle the harder the fight, the longer the fight goes on here. So yeah, I have a shot on Gallon here. I think he's good up to about plus 125. Moving on, Oliver Enkamp, Luca Pokley. Weird fucking fight. I really am not a fan of Oliver Enkamp. He's minus 140 here in the comeback on Pokley. It's plus 120. He's a guy I've been trying to get forever. I bet Mark Lemminger against him in his last fight, and that was one of the most painful losses of the last year. Lemminger was up 2 rounds and just got caught in a buggy. It's either a buggy choke or a reverse triangle. But either way, it was brutal. Enkamp, he can be dynamic in his striking. He is dangerous. He's a good athlete. But I think his striking is a bit of a mess. Like, he doesn't have the best defense ever. He's not the most process-oriented. In the grappling, he's got pretty terrible defensive takedown defense. Like, he's very easy to get to the mat. He is opportunistic with his submissions. It's kind of weird because I feel like he's kind of in like the Manny Bermudez school of MMA where, you know, he's so aggressive attempting submissions that he catches guys off guard a lot. And the fact that he is as long and tall as he is kind of makes it complicated and kind of enhances the efficacy of those submission attempts. But I think his pure jiu-jitsu isn't actually any good. So he gets a ton of subs. He surprises guys a lot, but I feel like much better grapplers will dominate him. And so, like, I had kind of had some interest in Pokley, but I looked at the Pokley tape and, you know, I really just don't trust this guy. He goes, first of all, I mean, he is a grappler, and I feel like there is a lot of scope for him out grappling and camp in this fight on en route to a decision. But I feel like he's really reckless in his grappling. I don't think he's the best wrestler, though he'll push a pace. I think the pace he pushes is one that he can't sustain. I really don't trust his gas fight or his gas tank in fights that extend. I think he tries to be similar to Encamp. He does a lot of stupid things trying to sub guys, like pulling guillotines, stuff of that nature. And he just he could easily put himself here in situations that Encamp can capitalize on. On top of which, it's like Polkleit's fought really like truly awful competition. Like his best win was Dante Shiro in his last fight, and he didn't even look particularly great in that fight, in my opinion. Whereas the other side, Encamp obviously fought in the UFC. He's fought a number of decent fighters here in Bellator. I think he should be able to. I shouldn't say I think he should be able to do anything. I think Encamp, though, his experience plus how dangerous he is, and the fact that I don't think Encamp is super likely to get submitted here. I mean, he's never been submitted in his career, and I don't think Polkleit's submission offense is really going to be that effective at this level. So to me, I feel like Polkleit kind of needs to win this fight via grappling and positional control, and I don't really trust him to do so. I wanted to pay Polkleit, but ultimately it's like I think Encamp's got a huge finishing edge, which means I need to think there's a massive, massive edge for Polkleit in a decision to be value, and I just don't really see that. So yeah, I mean, I lean the Encamp side, but I have no interest in this fight. Next fight, Paula Christina taking on Denise Kielholtz. Kind of frustrating because I was kind of hoping Kielholtz would go. This line would be lined closely, given that Kielholtz is 6-5. She's like one of the best 6-5 fighters ever. But she's taking on Paula Christina here. Christina's not bad. She's a decent striker. She's a mid grappler, in my opinion. But I look at this fight and I just feel like Kielholtz is just a lot better at just about everything. Does she deserve to be minus 230, like 70%? I don't know. I don't really love how often Kielholtz is willing to just kind of let rounds slip away or let minutes slip away. Like she's very, very happy to have a staring contest. And like when you get into those kinds of fights, it can go into incredibly bad places because it just takes one or two, not even big strikes, significant like hard shots to swing around. Like you look at her, she gave Juliana Velasquez a hell of a fight, went to a split decision, but then she lost a split decision to Laura Giovanni in her last fight. She tends to, if she's not finishing, she tends to fight close with everybody. And so from that perspective, while I think she's a much more skilled fighter than Christina, I don't think she doesn't look bad on tape. And so I can understand why people like her and think she's going to compete here. And I do kind of think she's going to compete on minutes in this fight. I'd be very, very surprised by Kielholtz separating. But ultimately, I mean, what's kind of steered me away from a shot at Christina is the same thing I talked about in the last fight. I think in terms of finishing edge, there's just a huge edge on the Kielholtz side. I think she's a much bigger hitter. I think she's a more dangerous submission grappler of the two, even though I don't think she's as good as a submission grappler as her record would suggest. And I feel like Christina is not very likely to finish her. And so again, it's like huge gap in finishing equity in this fight. And I don't actually think there's that big of a gap in decision equity at all. If anything, I'd probably favor Kielholtz in a decision. So while I do understand why it can be tempting to take the shot at Christina here, I also kind of just feel like, you're steering into pretty thin margins. Like I know Christina has a bunch of KOs, but they're not against the best competition. So I lean Kielholtz. I think the minus whatever it is, 225, 230 is probably fine. I don't feel passionately about it. Moving on, we got Tibal Goti. He's taking on Kane Musa. Interesting fight here. Line's been coming in quite a ways. It's down to Goti minus 112. Goti, I don't even know how you say it. Down to minus 112. Musa plus or minus 108. I have no bet here yet, but I'm starting to get interested potentially in a Goti bet. It's a weird fight. It's funny. Like I thought Kane Musa had been around for a lot longer than he has been, but he really hasn't. And like watching him fight, it's very weird because Musa will have like these long stretches of from time to time where it seems disengaged and he's just letting guys get off output on him. But then you'll have fights like his last fight against Georgie Karakanian where he just kind of kept his foot on the gas the entire fight, seemed to fight through fatigue very well, and just kind of ripped through Georgie. I was very surprised to see that, to be honest. Um, but yeah, I mean, in terms of Musa, like he's an okay striker. I don't think he's got the best defense in the world. Like I said, his volume vacillates between being very high volume and being low volume. You know, when he lost to Davy Gallen, I thought his volume in that fight looked horrendous, but obviously it looked great in his last fight. He is a powerful guy, though I sort of think he is not as powerful as the market or, most MMA fans think he is. He's only got 4 KOs. He does swing very hard and he's hurt guys before, but I don't think he's got the best finishing instincts in the world. And I don't know. I feel like guys don't react off his shots like he is a huge hitter. I do think he's a plus hitter, but I also don't think he's a monstrous hitter. Mediocre grappler, in my opinion. He's not really bringing anything to the table to threaten Guti with there. On the Guti side, obviously 36 UFC alum, did not fare very well there, went 1-5. But I really like Guti's game in general for winning rounds at this level, the Bellator level. He's going to pressure basically nonstop and just keeps an absolutely ferocious pace. Even in fights where we've seen him slow down from the pace, he seems to just find a way to dig through. And it's almost like he fought this guy named Lewis Long in his Bellator debut, and Guti looked, gassed as shit like 6 minutes into that fight. And it was almost like Dricus Du Plessis versus Brad Tavares, where he was gassed, but you could tell he was visibly exhausted, but he kind of just kept forcing himself to fight through it and keep throwing. It was an impressive performance. And look, he's fought much better competition. He is the much more experienced fighter of the two. Again, I like this guy's minute winning tools. I don't think he's nearly as powerful a striker as Musa is, which is why I wasn't really interested in Guti at, the minus 150 to minus 125 where it's been, just because I think Musa's power is a bit of an equalizer. But I do think Guti's going to be able to front foot him here and is going to be able to keep volume in his face. And just generally should win minutes if he's not, getting hurt frequently, even go. And I mean, on top of that, this guy's just like a tough bastard. Like the Alfie Davis last fight, he actually looked really good until he broke his arm about a minute into round 2. And literally with a broken arm that he could barely throw, the dude just continued to just truck forward and stay in Davis's face with one hand, just firing a jab at him. Obviously, he lost that fight. But what I'm getting at is, if Guti had a bit more finishing equity in him, I'd be betting him for a decent amount here, just because I think on minutes, it's going to be really hard for Musa to keep pace. I think he's going to be on the back foot for most of this fight. I think Guti's pretty reliable to out-attempt him by a decent margin and likely outland him by a decent margin. Obviously, Guti's hittable, so him getting, just murdered here is not out of the realm of possibility. But I feel like there's just such a disparity in experience, on level of comp in general, on general minute winning ability, that like Guti's got to be in the minus 125 to minus 150 range. And now he's down to minus 112 and the money just keeps coming on Musa. I'm strongly considering a Guti bet here. We'll see where the line goes. I might even take him where it is right now at minus 112. But I do think, these are the kind of spots that I think are a blind spot for the market, where they see a guy like Musa, he's a huge hitter, and are just ignoring the fact that he's fighting, a really tough and durable guy who is going to just push an absolutely hellacious pace. Moving on, we got Douglas Lima taking on Castelo Von Steenis. Weird fight. Von Steenis minus 165, Lima plus 145 at this moment in time. I'm kind of tempted to buy low on Douglas here. I feel a bit burned because I tried to buy low on Douglas against Joshua Jackson in his last fight. Obviously, he got absolutely mauled in that fight. And so, in taping this, I was kind of looking out to see, will Von Steenis grapple? And he will here and there. I wouldn't say he attempts takedowns often, but we did see him go to the takedowns to win the Fabian Edwards fight. And I don't think he's a very good wrestler, but he does have, he has a decent single leg. It's kind of funny because the standard for single leg takedowns in professional MMA is so low. Like so few guys can actually run the pipe effectively. And I think Von Steenis actually can. But beyond that, he doesn't have much. I don't think he sets up his entries particularly well. I don't think his doubles the best. I don't think he chain wrestles very well. But on top, he's a decent grappler. He's got a decent submission game. Uh, Obviously, he's not a grappler by trade. He's much more of a Dutch kickboxer. But I mean, the point is being, I feel like that's what you need to look out for with Douglas Lima. And so, in the context of this fight, it's really hard for me to get a grasp on both. Is he a good enough wrestler to take Lima down? And if he is, can Lima get back up? To the first question, I feel like the answer is maybe. I wouldn't be shocked if you told me Von Steenis got 2 takedowns and held Douglas down for multiple minutes at a time or full rounds. On the other side, I also just wouldn't be shocked if Douglas sees them coming and is able to easily keep this, upright. But obviously, in the former scenario, I mean, Von Steenis is probably paying off his price if he's hitting 2 to 3 takedowns in this fight, in all likelihood. And so then on the feet, it's like, who do I favor? Yeah, I mean, I favor Douglas there for sure. But at the same time, Lima is also a guy whose process I don't love. He is a dangerous striker. He's technically very sound, but he's incredibly low volume. And his power and his threats generally force his opponents into low volume matches as well, which help him. But again, like the nature of that kind of fight means you're constantly putting yourself at risk for losing a close decision. And so it's like if they fought 15 minutes on the feet and he does stuff all the takedowns, yeah, he probably in that scenario pays off plus 145, but it's probably a close fight. I do think for the fight, I give Lima a bit more finishing upside. He is really tough. He does hit hard. And Lima survived with much better grapplers than Costello Von Steenis on top of him. I'd be a bit surprised if he got subbed there. And I'd be a bit surprised if he got knocked out. Like, it's not impossible, and Von Steenis can hit. But Lima's only been finished twice in his career in over 40 fights. I don't know. But again, at the same time, it's just like the grappling hole at this point in Lima's career just seems so gigantic that a guy who potentially is going to attempt 3 to 5 takedowns makes it scary enough that I think I'd want a bigger number than plus 140. What I did play here, though, I played the over 2.5 at minus 180. As I mentioned, Lima's very durable. He always has been. On the feet, he is going to minimize exchanges to the max. And on the ground, he's very, very difficult to pass and sub. Yeah, Johnny, I bet the over. And then in terms of, I think Costello side, I actually kind of feel like Lima is, as I mentioned, a lot more likely to finish him, where I could see him maybe badly affecting Costello's calf and having him setting him up to walk on to something. I think that's a fairly live possibility, but it's like Lima's volume is so low. Live is like 20%. Like I really would be pretty surprised to see. I shouldn't say I'd be pretty surprised to see this fight finish. I just kind of feel like on the Von Steenis side, his finishing equity is quite low. And even on the Lima side, I feel like engagements are going to be limited enough that he's not going to have that many chances to finish. I feel like it would be pretty tough to put him over 20% to finish. Like I feel like they should be lined kind of in the 70% range to go the distance. And the over 2.5 is minus 180. I think that's a pretty good spot, honestly. So yeah, I'm on that for 1.8 units. Moving on, Mansour Barnaoui taking on Brent Primus. I fortunately avoided the landmine that was Adam Piccolotti against Barnaoui. I almost bet him. I thought really hard about it and ultimately passed. But it's funny because when this fight was booked, I was like, I'm definitely going to bet Primus. Like, it's kind of the classic spot that I like to really take a look at and bet the dog on, because obviously this Barnaoui's second Bellator fight. He's fighting a guy in Primus who's a former champion who's fought a lot of high-level competition. But then I looked at the tape, and it's just like, man, I think Barnaoui is a lot more legit than I thought prior to the Piccolotti fight. Even this guy's losses, if you go back, like he is really only lost to like absolute monsters like Makhachev, Gamrot. Like it's really crazy. And then to go and watch the Piccolotti fight, I mean, the way he dumpstered Piccolotti on the ground was shocking to me. Like Piccolotti went 15 minutes with Sidney Outlaw, who's probably one of the best who had probably one of the best two grapplers in that division in Bellator, and they were having competitive scrambles back and forth for 15 minutes. He comes in here, takes Barnui down off the bat, immediately gets swept and gets mauled for a round. Barnui immediately gets back on top of him in round two, again with a sweep, and mauls him again. Like, nobody mauls at a Piccolotti on the ground. It's just not something that happens. So seeing that, it's like, well, I mean, do I think like I think there are some holes in Barnui's grappling in that if you put him on bottom, he's not going to use conventional get-ups. He's going to try to use that jiggler sweep he uses to get on top of you. And I think there are obviously in the sport a lot of positionally sound grapplers who can punish that and just he won't hit it against and he'll be able to just kind of easily control him. But is Brent Primus that guy? Like, I think Primus will go for takedowns, but I feel like Primus likes playing from the bottom a lot more than he likes playing from the top. And if he was hitting the sweep against Piccolotti, like, I know it's like wiki capping it, but like I can't help but think he's going to hit it here. Like, I think Piccolotti is a much better top player than Primus is. So yeah, I mean, I don't think Primus is very likely to hold him down and ride him out. On the feet, I think it's competitive. I don't think Barnui is a great striker. He's athletic and he hits reasonably hard, but I mean, Primus keeps a high pace. He throws strong leg kicks. If they fought standing for 25 minutes, I mean, the line's going to be way, way off. Like, I think it's a very, very competitive fight. I might even lean Primus, but I just don't see any way that happens. And on top of that, you know, Primus is 38 years old. Barnui is 30 and just came off a 3-year hiatus in the best, you know, form of his career. I think he's going to absolutely tear Primus to shreds here. No interest really in betting it for me, but I think the line is fine. Moving on, main event though. Gegard Mousasi, he is taking on the worst Edwards, Fabian Edwards, and I bet Mousasi here. Bet him yesterday at minus 225. Looks like Edwards is taking some money. Mousasi's down to minus 235 here. I don't think Fabian Edwards is like bad or anything, but I do think, you know, if you think about, you know, MMA and betting MMA as if it's any other kind of market, like say stocks, commodities, crypto, any other betting market, you know, it would be hard to wrap your head around this. Like, you're trying to punish recency bias when you're betting, really. Gegard Mousasi was minus 300 against Johnny Eblen in his last fight. Minus 250 against Austin Vanderford the fight before that. Minus 450 against John Salter. Minus 185 against Douglas Lima. Minus 350 against Machida. And now, a fight after he was minus 300 against Johnny Eblen, he's minus 225 against Fabian Edwards. I mean, Johnny Eblen, all those guys, except for, I guess, Machida, are absolute studs. And I mean, Edwards just isn't on the level of any of those guys. And the market thought Mousasi was good enough to be that chalked up there. Now he's fighting Fabian Edwards, and the market's like, meh, time to lower his stock. Should definitely be a smaller favorite than he was against Johnny Eblen. Like, to me, from a market perspective right there, I mean, that's a big red flag. In terms of the fight itself, I will say the Machida fight, I think, is like the one fight that you could argue giving pause here, as Machida is one of the only southpaws he's fought in recent years, and they went to a split. But I feel like Machida's game's a lot more tricky than Edwards is. You know, Machida, he relies on movement, kicks, just likes to hang out on the outside and just minimize exchanges. And, you know, as I've been talking about throughout this show, what happens when you have very, very few exchanges and no one gets hurt? You tend to have very, very dicey decisions. Now, personally, I thought Mousasi won that fight fairly clear, but the judges didn't, and that's always the risk. But I don't really think Edwards is super likely to put together that style of game plan here. Or if he is, I just don't think he's likely to execute it as well as Machida does. You know, even old Machida, you know, the guy's got so much experience and has been done this for so many years. He can just read angles a lot better than Edwards can. Look, if they just stay at range for 25 minutes and stand in the middle, I feel like, you know, Edwards can probably keep things moderately competitive, but I would still favor Mousasi in that fight. But I think it's much more likely to look like the Douglas Lima fight, where you end up having Mousasi pressuring a lot here. You see him do some decent clinch work, and you just kind of see optics favoring Mousasi for most of this fight. I mean, look, he's a technically better striker. His shot selection is much, much better. As I mentioned, he's taking a huge step down in competition from what he's fought in recent years. If he grapples here, he should, like, he really should grapple here. That would be in his best interest. He's going to just maul Edwards. Like, Mousasi on top is very, very, very nasty. And Fabian Edwards on bottom, I kind of touched on it with the Van Steenis fight. But this guy got mauled by Costello Van Steenis on top of him. He won that fight, but like he spent 4.5 minutes on his back at one point with Van Steenis passing his guard like butter. Mousasi is a much better grappler than Van Steenis is. If he gets on top of Edwards, I think he owns him in that position, could even finish him potentially. And so, like, there's just so many paths to victory for Mousasi. Whereas I look at with Edwards, and I feel like maybe the line's moving because the age difference. Edwards is 30, Mousasi's 37. But Mousasi's still got a great chin. This guy, he hasn't been knocked out he's only been stopped once in his career, and he hasn't been knocked out since Uriah Hall spinning back kick in 2015. The guy's durable as hell, and so he's fighting a 30-year-old fighter who's probably at his peak right now, who's low volume, who doesn't, in my opinion, Fabian Edwards does not have that much stopping power for middleweight. He's got some knockouts, but not really many against anybody I'd rate. Only 4 career KOs. Obviously, he knocked out Machida, but Machida, again, aforementioned, is old. And so I feel like Edwards to win this fight really needs a perfect fight. And by that, either maybe he clips Mousasi and Mousasi's durability suddenly goes. Not impossible, but fairly low percentage. I don't think it's something you can really cap here, given, the level of form we've seen from Mousasi in the last 2 years. Or, Mousasi kind of just agrees to give him a low volume outside kickboxing match. We end up having a fairly competitive decision. Edwards wins a close decision. I think that's plausible. Plausible enough. But again, there's just like so many things here. I guess as you would call them, or as my buddy Brooks would call them, just so many variance mitigators on the Mousasi side, where it's like the guy's got a huge grappling edge, huge finishing upside edge, huge technical edge. He's going to have an optics edge here. He basically has to give Edwards the perfect fight, in my opinion, to lose this fight. I think Mousasi in the -3 to 400 range makes a lot more sense than where it is now. Yeah, again, I just think Edwards' finishing upside is very low, and I think Edwards winning a decision relies very, very heavily on Mousasi giving him the perfect fight. So, yeah, I'm on Mousasi. I risk 2.25 units at -225. Like I said, I think -250 or lower is a pretty good spot for Moose. So, yeah, that's what I got this card. Just to recap, 2.25 units, Gegard Mousasi -225. I bet the over in Lima and Von Steenis. I bet Tim Wild at +250. I bet Jose Augusto at +110. I bet Davey Gallen at +175. Yeah, that's what I got, guys. I hope you enjoyed the show. Like I said, I'll keep putting out the content. If you don't subscribe, please drop a like and subscribe. I'd appreciate it. Lags would appreciate it. Club and Sub Nation would appreciate it. Yeah, hope you guys have a great card tomorrow. Once again, just like UFC on Saturday, it's in the morning, so you probably won't be having mimosas since I'm guessing most people are working. But yeah, if you're trying to just screw around, it'll be on 11:30 a.m. On YouTube. So check it out. Let's have fun this weekend. Hopefully we all make some money. Good night. God bless. See you guys Wednesday night, 7 p.m. Peace.